Some people let a little bit of authority go straight to their heads, convinced they are untouchable gods in their jurisdiction. They hide behind a badge to bully, profile, and harass anyone who doesn't fit their narrow view of the world. But what happens when the man they illegally target, physically assault, and brutally arrest in the middle of a crowded airport terminal isn't just a regular civilian, but a highly decorated Tier 1 Navy SEAL carrying classified Pentagon intelligence? This is the story of Chief Kendrick Hale, a man who endured the ultimate disrespect only to unleash a tidal wave of instant, career-ending karma on the corrupt officers who messed with the wrong operator. The fluorescent lights of Dulles International Airport buzzed with a low, irritating hum that seemed to bore directly into Chief Petty Officer Kendrick Hale's skull. Outside, a miserable mix of sleet and rain battered the massive glass windows of the terminal, reflecting the grim gray exhaustion that settled deep into Kendrick's bones. He had been awake for days on end. The last stretch of his life had been spent in the freezing mud of an undisclosed border region in Eastern Europe, executing a snatch-and-grab operation so highly classified that only a handful of people inside the Pentagon even knew it had occurred. Kendrick was a senior chief in the United States Navy, specifically attached to the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, widely known as SEAL Team 6. But looking at him right now, blending into the tired masses of delayed travelers, nobody would have guessed he was one of the most lethal men on the planet. Kendrick stood at 6'2", possessing the broad, densely packed shoulders of a man who spent his life carrying heavy gear over unforgiving terrain. He was a black man in his late 30s with a closely cropped beard, exhausted, bloodshot eyes, and a quiet, stoic demeanor. To maintain a low profile, he was dressed in civilian clothes: a worn, heavy tan Carhartt jacket, a faded black hoodie pulled up against the airport draft, dark denim jeans, and scuffed hiking boots. His only luggage was a rugged, heavily reinforced black Pelican case secured with 2 industrial-grade steel padlocks. Inside that case was the recovered hardware from his mission, a piece of encrypted enemy technology that the Department of Defense was desperate to get their hands on. Kendrick just wanted to grab a black coffee, find his connecting flight out of the civilian terminal, and eventually make his way to the secure debriefing room in Arlington. He kept his head down, his posture relaxed but completely aware of his surroundings. Decades of Tier 1 training meant he didn't just walk through a room. He scanned it. He registered the exits, the blind spots, and the potential threats. Unfortunately, 2 specific threats had just registered him. Standing near the concourse security checkpoint, leaning against a pillar with the casual arrogance of men who believed they owned the building, were Officer Vance Keller and Officer Bryce Nolan. They were part of a specialized interagency task force assigned to Dulles, a mix of local and airport police given broad authority to spot and detain suspicious individuals. Keller was a deeply cynical man in his mid-40s, possessing a tightly wound, aggressive energy and a history of excessive force complaints that miraculously kept disappearing from his personnel file. Nolan was younger, heavier, and entirely dependent on Keller for his worldview. They were bored, frustrated by a slow shift, and looking for someone to push around. Keller's pale eyes tracked Kendrick as the SEAL walked toward a deserted coffee kiosk. "Check out the guy in the tan jacket," Keller muttered, nudging his partner. Nolan chewed his gum, looking over. The big guy? What about him? Look at the way he's walking, Keller said, his tone dripping with immediate, unwarranted suspicion. Head down, trying not to make eye contact, hood up indoors, and look at that case he's carrying. Heavy, locked tight. He doesn't look like a corporate traveler, Bryce. He looks like a problem. Think he's moving something? Nolan asked, standing up a little straighter, his hand instinctively resting on his utility belt. I think he doesn't belong in this terminal, Keller replied. It was a classic case of profiling. Keller saw a large, ruggedly dressed black man with a locked military-grade case, and his prejudiced mind immediately filled in the blanks with criminal assumptions. Let's go have a chat, see if we can ruin his night. Kendrick was waiting for the tired barista to hand him his Americano when his peripheral vision picked up the two officers closing the distance. Their body language was textbook aggressive posturing, chests puffed out, hands resting near their weapons, a deliberate wide-stanced walk meant to intimidate. Kendrick let out a slow, silent breath. He didn't have the time or the patience for this, but his operational protocols were strict. He was to remain entirely undercover until the package was delivered. Under no circumstances was he to reveal his Tier 1 status to local law enforcement, unless it was a matter of life or death. He was supposed to act like an ordinary citizen. "Excuse me, buddy," Keller barked, stopping about 3 feet behind Kendrick. Kendrick took his coffee, paid the barista, and slowly turned around. He kept his face entirely neutral, a mask of calm composure. "Can I help you, officers?" "Yeah, you can," Keller said, stepping uncomfortably close, trying to use his physical presence to dominate the space. It didn't work. Kendrick was taller and significantly more dangerous, though he hit it well. "Where are you flying in from?" "Europe," Kendrick answered simply, his voice a deep, steady baritone. "Connecting flight." "Europe," Keller repeated mockingly. "That's a big place. Be more specific." "Frankfurt," Kendrick lied smoothly, providing his cover story. Nolan stepped around to Kendrick's side, staring pointedly at the heavy black Pelican case resting on the floor. "What's in the box, man? Looks heavy." "Camera equipment," Kendrick said. "I'm a freelance photographer." Keller scoffed, looking Kendrick up and down with blatant disgust. "A photographer, right? You don't look like a photographer. You look like you're carrying something you shouldn't be. I need to see your ID." Kendrick knew his rights, but he also knew that escalating a situation with 2 clearly biased cops while carrying highly classified foreign intelligence was a terrible tactical move. Slowly, deliberately telegraphing his movement so they wouldn't panic, Kendrick reached into his back pocket. He bypassed his military identification and his secure DoD access cards, pulling out his standard civilian Virginia driver's license. He handed it to Keller. Keller snatched it, shining a ridiculously bright tactical flashlight onto the card, even though the terminal was fully lit. "Kendrick Hale, address in Virginia Beach." "What are you doing in Washington, Kendrick?" "Like I said, connecting flight. Now, if you're done running my ID, I'd like to go sit down." "I'll tell you when we're done," Keller snapped. He handed the license to Nolan. "Run him. See what kind of warrants Mr. Hale has hiding." Kendrick's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "I don't have warrants. I haven't done anything wrong." "Am I being detained, officer?" "We're conducting an investigative stop," Keller sneered. "And right now you're acting incredibly nervous. Makes me think you're hiding something." He pointed to the Pelican case. Pop the locks. I want to see this camera equipment. Kendrick planted his feet. The line had been crossed. No. The single word hung in the air, cold and definitive. Keller blinked, momentarily taken aback by the sheer lack of fear in Kendrick's voice. Cops like Keller were used to people stuttering, complying out of sheer terror, or getting loudly belligerent. They weren't used to a quiet, unbreakable wall of refusal. "Excuse me," Keller demanded, his hand dropping to rest on his taser. "I said no," Kendrick repeated, his voice never rising above a conversational volume. "You do not have my consent to search my property. You have no probable cause, no warrant, and I have committed no crime. The Fourth Amendment protects me from unreasonable search and seizure." Nolan laughed from the sidelines, looking up from his radio. "Oh, we got a constitutional scholar here, Vance, a regular lawyer." "Listen to me very carefully, boy," Keller said, taking another step forward, violating Kendrick's personal space, his breath smelling of cheap tobacco and stale mints. The use of the word boy was deliberate, a racial microaggression designed to provoke a reaction. "You are in an international airport. The rules are different here. If I want to open that box, I'm opening that box. Now give me the keys." Kendrick's heart rate remained steady. In his mind, he had already calculated multiple ways to incapacitate Keller and disarm Nolan in seconds. He could shatter Keller's knee with a push kick, strip Nolan's weapon, and have both men unconscious on the linoleum before anyone could react. But doing so would compromise the mission. It would put him in federal custody, delay the delivery of the intelligence, and create an international media nightmare for the Navy. He had to absorb the abuse. He had to be a ghost. "I am a domestic traveler currently on a layover," Kendrick stated clearly, ensuring the growing crowd of onlookers could hear him. "I have already passed through TSA screening at my point of origin. You are local law enforcement, not customs or border protection. You do not have the jurisdiction to unilaterally search a locked case without a warrant. I am politely asking you to return my ID and let me go." "You don't tell me what my jurisdiction is," Keller barked, his face flushing red with sudden rage. His authority was being challenged in public, and his fragile ego couldn't handle it. "You're getting loud. You're causing a disturbance. You're resisting a lawful order." "I am standing perfectly still," Kendrick pointed out calmly. "Take him," Keller snapped to Nolan. Without warning, Nolan lunged, grabbing Kendrick's left arm, trying to wrench it behind his back. Keller moved in simultaneously, grabbing Kendrick's right shoulder and attempting to sweep his legs. It was like trying to tackle an oak tree. Kendrick didn't strike back, but he immediately lowered his center of gravity, his core tightening into solid iron. For agonizing seconds, the two cops grunted and strained, desperately trying to force the seal to the ground. Kendrick just stood there, absorbing their chaotic, uncoordinated energy. "Stop resisting! Stop resisting!" Keller screamed for the benefit of the bystander cell phone cameras. Even though Kendrick wasn't fighting back, he just wasn't falling down. Realizing that taking them both out would violate his orders, Kendrick made a calculated choice. He relaxed his muscles and allowed himself to be pushed face first against the nearest concrete pillar. "Get your hands behind your back," Nolan yelled, heavily winded, slamming a knee into the back of Kendrick's thigh. Kendrick complied, crossing his wrists behind his back. The cold steel of the handcuffs clicked loudly, locking tight. Keller, out of pure spite, squeezed the cuffs an extra notch on both wrists, ensuring the metal bit painfully into the bone. Kendrick didn't even wince. He had endured SERE, survival, evasion, resistance, and escape, training. A pair of tight handcuffs applied by a frustrated airport cop felt like a minor inconvenience. "You're making a catastrophic mistake," Kendrick said quietly over his shoulder as Keller patted him down aggressively, removing his wallet, keys, and cell phone. "Shut up," Keller hissed, leaning in close to Kendrick's ear. "You think you're tough? You're nothing. You're going to a holding cell, and I'm going to rip that case apart with a crowbar. Let's see how smart you are when you're facing federal smuggling charges." Nolan grabbed the handle of the Pelican case, grunting at the weight. "Heavy son of a gun." "Bring it," Keller ordered. He grabbed Kendrick by the bicep, pushing him forward. "Walk." They paraded him through the terminal like a trophy. Dozens of civilians stopped to stare, whispering and pointing. Kendrick kept his chin parallel to the floor, his eyes fixed dead ahead. He felt no shame, only a cold, calculating anticipation. These men had no idea what they had just set in motion. They thought they had bagged a criminal. They didn't realize they had just kidnapped a Tier 1 operator and stolen classified Department of Defense property. The countdown to their professional destruction had just begun. The airport precinct was a sterile, windowless labyrinth of cinder block walls and scuffed linoleum, smelling of ammonia and stale sweat. Keller and Nolan shoved Kendrick into a small, brightly lit interrogation room, aggressively forcing him into a hard metal chair bolted to the floor. They slammed the heavy Pelican case onto the metal table in front of him. "Sit tight, tough guy," Keller smirked, pulling Kendrick's wallet out of his pocket and tossing it onto the table. "We're going to have a lot of fun tearing your life apart." The door slammed shut, leaving Kendrick alone. He tested the cuffs. He could easily dislocate his thumb and slip out of them. But again, patience was his ultimate weapon. He closed his eyes, controlling his breathing, mentally filing away every detail of the last minutes, the badge numbers, the names, the timeline. Minutes later, the door opened. Keller and Nolan returned, accompanied by a third man. He was older, with a thickening waistline, graying hair, and the insignia of a police captain on his collar. This was Captain Raymond Collier, the precinct commander. Collier was a relic of the old school, a man fiercely protective of his officers, regardless of their actions. If his men said a suspect was dirty, Collier treated them as dirty. Collier pulled out a chair and sat across from Kendrick, eyeing him with a mixture of boredom and contempt. "Officer Keller tells me you were causing a disturbance in the terminal, refusing to identify yourself, acting belligerent, resisting arrest." "Officer Keller is a liar," Kendrick said evenly. "I provided identification. I did not raise my voice. I merely declined an illegal search of my property. I am asking for my one phone call." Collier chuckled, a wet, rattling sound. "You watch too much television, Mr. Hale. You'll get a phone call when we process you. Right now, we are trying to determine what kind of threat you pose to my airport." He tapped the top of the Pelican case. "My guys think you're moving drugs or weapons. Now I can call a judge, wake him up, and get a warrant. Or you can save us all some time, give us the keys, and maybe I talk to the DA about reducing the resisting charge." Kendrick leaned forward slightly. The atmosphere in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees as the SEAL finally let a fraction of his command presence bleed through his civilian disguise. "Captain Collier," Kendrick said, his voice dropping an octave, losing any trace of civilian deference. "I am going to give you one piece of advice. Do not touch that case. If you or your men attempt to cut those locks, pry it open, or tamper with it in any way, you will be committing a federal felony under the Espionage Act. You will bypass local jurisdiction and answer directly to the federal government. Do you understand me?" The room went dead silent. Keller scoffed nervously. Nolan looked confused. Captain Collier's eyes narrowed. The absolute certainty in Kendrick's voice, the lack of fear. It wasn't the behavior of a cornered drug mule. But Collier's pride won out. "Are you threatening me, son?" "I am stating a legal fact," Kendrick replied. "Run my fingerprints, see what happens, and then give me my phone." Collier stared at him for a long moment, trying to read the bluff. When he found none, he scowled. "Keller, take him to booking. Run his prints through the AIS database. Let's see what kind of record this tough guy is hiding." They pulled Kendrick up and marched him down the hall to the booking area. Nolan uncuffed his right hand and violently pressed his fingers onto the digital scanner. "Press hard," Nolan grunted. Kendrick remained silent as the machine scanned his prints. The computer screen showed a loading bar connecting to the national database. Keller leaned over the terminal, waiting for a long list of prior convictions to validate his racial profiling. The loading bar reached 100%. Instead of a mugshot or a rap sheet, the screen suddenly flashed a bright, solid crimson red. A blaring alarm tone beeped twice from the computer tower. Across the screen in massive block letters, a message appeared. Restricted. Department of Defense Security. Clearance Level 5. Yankee White. TS/SCI. Do not detain. Do not interrogate. Contact Pentagon Command Center immediately. Authorization Code TRIDENT. Keller's jaw dropped. The smug smirk instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a sudden, sickening pale color. Nolan took a step back, his eyes darting between the screen and Kendrick. "What? What is this?" Keller stammered, frantically hitting the keyboard. The screen remained locked on the red warning. "The system is glitching. What the hell is a code TRIDENT?" Kendrick slowly pulled his hand back from the scanner, looking at Keller with eyes as cold as the Arctic Ocean. "It means you messed with the wrong man, Officer Keller. Now give me my phone, or I can let the captain make the call and see how he enjoys speaking to a 4-star admiral." Panic was slowly beginning to seep into the precinct. Keller grabbed the desk phone and practically shoved it at Kendrick, his hands shaking slightly. "Make your call, but you're still in custody until we figure this out." Kendrick ignored him. He didn't dial a lawyer. He didn't dial a bail bondsman. With one hand still cuffed to his waist, he quickly dialed a highly restricted, secure 16-digit number that bypassed public networks and connected directly to the JSOC Joint Special Operations Command Communications Hub at the Pentagon in Arlington. The line rang exactly once. "Command Center clearance code required," a crisp, mechanical military voice answered. "Trident 7, Kendrick said, his voice ringing out clearly in the dead silent booking room. Keller, Nolan, and Captain Collier, who had just walked out to see what the commotion was, stood frozen, listening. "Clearance accepted, Chief Hale," the voice replied, recognizing the operator. "State your status." "Status is compromised," Kendrick stated flatly. I am currently being illegally detained by local law enforcement at Dulles International Airport, Precinct Station 2. The package is secure, but vulnerable. The officers have expressed intent to breach the container. I am requesting immediate federal extraction and intervention. There was a brief pause on the line. The temperature in the Pentagon's war room had just skyrocketed. "Copy that, Chief," the voice said, taking on an immediate, deadly serious tone. "Hold the line, patching you through to Vice Admiral Langston." When Captain Collier heard the words, "a Vice Admiral," the blood drained completely from his face. He looked at Keller, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. They hadn't busted a drug runner. They had just thrown handcuffs on a Tier 1 ghost, and the United States military was about to crash down on their heads. The receiver of the precinct's desk phone felt impossibly heavy in Kendrick's hand. Yet he held it with the relaxed grip of a man fully in control. The silence in the booking room was absolute, broken only by the hum of the fluorescent lights and the shallow, rapid breathing of Officer Keller. Captain Collier stepped forward, his face a mask of conflicting arrogance and rising terror. "Chief Hale," the voice of Vice Admiral Marcus Langston boomed through the receiver loud enough that the tiny speaker projected his words into the quiet room. Langston was the Deputy Commander of Special Operations Command, a man who moved satellite feeds and strike teams with a flick of his wrist. "Are you injured? Is the asset secure?" "I am uninjured, Admiral," Kendrick replied, his tone respectful but entirely devoid of the stress that usually accompanied an arrest. "The asset is currently sitting on a metal table in Interrogation Room B. It is locked. But local officers have expressed a strong verbal intent to breach it using physical force." "Put me on speaker," Langston ordered. The command wasn't a request. It was a localized earthquake. Kendrick pressed the speakerphone button and set the receiver down on the booking desk. He took a half step back, folding his arms. "This is Vice Admiral Marcus Langston, United States Navy." The voice echoed off the cinder block walls, carrying the weight of the entire Pentagon behind it. "Who is the senior officer in command of this facility?" Captain Collier swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. He stepped closer to the phone, shooting a furious, panicked glare at Keller, who was now backing away, looking like a man who had just stepped on a live landmine. This is Captain Raymond Collier, Dulles International Airport Police Authority," Collier stammered, trying to inject some authority into his voice, and failing miserably. "Captain Collier, shut your mouth and listen to me very carefully," Langston cut in, his voice dropping to a terrifying, quiet register that promised absolute destruction. "You do not have a misunderstanding. You have a national security crisis that you engineered. The man you have in handcuffs is Senior Chief Petty Officer Kendrick Hale, a Tier 1 operator currently acting under Title 10 covert authority. The case he is carrying contains Class A Special Access Program intelligence recovered from a hostile foreign theater." Nolan let out a small, involuntary whimper. He looked at the heavy black Pelican case sitting in the other room, through the security glass, suddenly realizing that he had manhandled a box that probably carried state secrets. "Admiral, we didn't know," Collier pleaded, the reality of his pension vaporizing before his eyes. He was in civilian clothes. He refused a search. Officer Keller and Nolan were following standard interdiction protocols for suspected trafficking. Your officers profiled a black man in a Carhartt jacket, assaulted him, and illegally detained him without a shred of probable cause. Langston fired back, stripping away the thin veneer of police procedure to expose the raw bigotry beneath. I have already pinged Chief Hale's encrypted location. I know exactly where you are. I am currently looking at the live feed of your precinct's exterior security cameras via satellite. Keller gasped, instinctively looking up at the ceiling as if a drone were hovering inside the booking room. You're going to do exactly what I tell you, Captain. Langston continued, relentless. First, you are going to remove those handcuffs from Chief Hale immediately. If he has a single scratch on his wrists, I will personally see to it that the Department of Justice opens a civil rights investigation into your entire department. Collier frantically gestured to Nolan. Get the keys, uncuff him now. Nolan scrambled forward, his hands shaking so violently he dropped the small silver key twice before finally managing to insert it into the locking mechanism. The cuffs clicked open. Kendrick slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists. He didn't say a word, didn't gloat, didn't even look at the two officers. His silence was infinitely more intimidating than any threat he could have uttered. Second, Langston's voice commanded from the speaker, you will secure the perimeter of your precinct. No one enters, no one leaves. You will not touch the Pelican case. You will not look at the Pelican case. In minutes, a joint federal task force comprised of the FBI's National Security Branch and Naval Criminal Investigative Service will arrive at your front door. You will surrender jurisdiction. You will hand over all body camera footage, and you will pray to whatever God you believe in that the intelligence inside that case hasn't been compromised by your staggering incompetence. Admiral, please, Collier tried one last time, desperation cracking his voice. My men made a mistake. Let's handle this internally. I can have him escorted to... The time for handling things internally ended the moment your men laid hands on a United States Navy SEAL. Langston stated with brutal finality, do not speak to me again. Do not hang up this phone. You are officially relieved of your authority over this situation. The line went silent, though the connection remained open. A soft electronic hum, broadcasting the Pentagon's listening ear into the room. Captain Collier slowly turned to look at Keller. The aggressive, cocky cop who had paraded Kendrick through the terminal just minutes prior was gone. In his place stood a pale, sweating, terrified middle-aged man who had just realized his entire life was about to be dismantled piece by piece. What did you do, Vance? Collier whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. What the hell did you do? Keller couldn't answer. He just stared at Kendrick, who was calmly retrieving his wallet and phone from the booking desk. His posture relaxed, a silent storm waiting to break. The next minutes were the longest of Vance Keller's life. The atmosphere inside the precinct was suffocating. Captain Collier had locked the front doors and pulled the blinds, effectively turning the station into a tomb. The other desk sergeants and duty officers, having overheard the speakerphone conversation, stayed frozen at their stations, terrified to make a sound. No one spoke to Kendrick. The SEAL simply leaned against the wall near the interrogation room, keeping a visual lock on the Pelican case through the window. He was a predator, patiently waiting for his pack to arrive. Soon after, the quiet hum of the airport was shattered by the screech of heavy tactical tires on the pavement outside. Red and blue strobe lights painted the frosted glass of the precinct's front doors, It wasn't the slow, methodical arrival of local backup. It was an invasion. Through the windows, Keller watched in absolute horror as 4 matte black armored Chevrolet Suburbans aggressively jumped the curb, barricading the precinct's entrance. Before the vehicles had even fully stopped, the doors flew open. More than a dozen heavily armed men and women poured out. They weren't wearing standard police blues. They wore tactical olive drab and heavy plate carriers. Emblazoned across their backs in bold yellow letters were the acronyms of Ultimate Federal Authority, FBI and NCIS. "Open the doors," a voice roared from outside, accompanied by heavy, violent pounding on the reinforced glass. Collier practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to unlock the deadbolt. The moment the lock clicked, the doors were shoved open so hard they bounced off the wall. A wave of federal agents flooded the lobby, instantly taking tactical control of the room. They fanned out, their hands resting on their holstered weapons, eyes scanning for any sign of resistance. Following closely behind them was a tall, sharp-featured man in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a leather badge wallet, and a woman in a crisp Navy service uniform. The man in the suit stepped forward, his eyes sweeping the terrified local cops before landing on Kendrick. He walked past Captain Collier as if the man were a piece of furniture. "Chief Hale," the woman in the Navy uniform said, snapping a crisp salute. This was Commander Lauren Whitaker, JSOC liaison. "Sir, are you secure?" Kendrick returned the salute effortlessly. "Secure, Commander. The package is in Interrogation B, unbreached. But chain of custody was temporarily compromised by these officers." The man in the suit, FBI Special Agent in Charge Garrett Cole, turned his attention to the local cops, his expression one of absolute unyielding contempt. "Captain Collier?" Cole asked, his voice sharp like cracking ice. "Yes, sir," Collier choked out. "I am Special Agent Cole, FBI Counterintelligence. Under the authority of the Patriot Act and the National Security Act, I am assuming total federal control of this facility, its personnel, and all digital and physical evidence on the premises." Cole snapped his fingers, and 2 agents immediately moved to the precinct's server room to seize the security and body camera footage. Cole slowly turned his gaze to Keller and Nolan, who were huddled near the booking desk. "Which one of you is Officer Vance Keller?" Keller swallowed, feeling a cold sweat drip down his spine. He raised a trembling hand. "I am." "Officer Keller," Cole said, walking slowly toward him, closing the distance until he was uncomfortably close, mirroring the exact intimidation tactic Keller had used on Kendrick earlier. But Cole wasn't bluffing. "Minutes ago, a federal judge signed a warrant for your immediate arrest along with Officer Nolan." "Arrest?" Keller gasped, his bravado completely shattered. Wait. We were just doing our jobs. He was acting suspicious. We didn't know he was military." "Ignorance of the law and ignorance of the man you were illegally assaulting is not a defense," Cole stated coldly. "You are being charged with deprivation of rights under color of law, assault on a federal officer, and attempted violation of the Espionage Act." "You can't do this," Keller yelled, a sudden, desperate panic overtaking him. He looked at Collier. "Cap, tell them we were following terminal protocols." Collier looked away, abandoning his man to save himself. "Turn around, Officer Keller," Cole ordered. "No, listen to me." Keller started to back away, his hand instinctively twitching toward his duty belt. It was the worst mistake he could have made. Before Keller could even formulate a thought, 2 massive FBI tactical agents closed the gap. They hit Keller hard, spinning him around and slamming him face first into the concrete wall of his own booking area, the exact same wall he had pushed Kendrick into. "Do not resist," one of the agents barked, grabbing Keller's arms and wrenching them violently behind his back. The sound of steel ratcheting echoed in the room as heavy federal handcuffs were slapped onto Keller's wrists, clicking tight. Nolan didn't even wait to be ordered. Sobbing quietly, the younger officer immediately dropped to his knees, lacing his fingers behind his head and surrendering. Kendrick watched the entire scene unfold with a quiet, detached satisfaction. He picked up his coffee from the desk. It was stone cold by now, but he took a sip anyway. Karma hadn't just knocked on Keller's door. It had kicked it off the hinges and brought the entire United States government with it. The precinct had transformed in the blink of an eye. It was no longer a local law enforcement stronghold. It was a federal crime scene, and the air crackled with the terrifying, suffocating tension of absolute, inescapable authority. Special Agent Cole stood dead center in the booking room. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He didn't need to. He was the maestro of this symphony of bureaucratic destruction, and every heavily armed agent in olive drab moved with lethal practice precision to his silent cues. "Strip them," Cole ordered. The command was delivered with the casual indifference of a man ordering a cup of coffee, his eyes not even bothering to track Keller and Nolan as they were held firmly against the booking counter. Two heavy-set FBI tactical agents stepped forward. This wasn't just a physical disarmament. It was a deliberate, methodical humiliation designed to psychologically strip away every ounce of the artificial power these men had abused. With swift, unforgiving precision, the agents began unbuckling the officers' thick leather duty belts. The loud, heavy thud of Keller's Glock 19 hitting the aluminum evidence table sounded exactly like a judge's gavel coming down. Next came the spare magazines, the steel handcuffs, the bright yellow tasers, and the radios that tied them to the precinct. Finally, the agent reached for Keller's chest. With a sharp, sudden tug, he ripped the gold badge from Keller's uniform shirt. That piece of polished metal was the shield Keller had hidden behind to bully, intimidate, and harass innocent civilians for years. Now it was just a piece of evidence. Nolan wept openly, his shoulders shaking uncontrollably as his own badge was tossed carelessly into a clear plastic bag. The younger cop fully grasped what Keller was still trying to stubbornly deny. Their careers, their freedom, and their lives as they knew them were evaporating into thin air. "Locker keys," Cole demanded, extending a flat, expectant palm. Keller, his cheek pressed painfully against the cold cinder block wall by a federal agent, desperately tried to scrape together a final shred of his former defiance. His chest heaved as he spat out. "You need a separate warrant to search my personal locker, Cole. You know the law. You can't just tear through my stuff without a judge signing off on it specifically." Cole actually smiled. It wasn't a warm expression. It was a thin, predatory curving of the lips that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. He slowly reached into the interior breast pocket of his tailored suit jacket and withdrew a thick folded document. He snapped it open, holding the freshly signed paperwork mere inches from Keller's sweating face. Federal Magistrate Judge Wyatt signed a blanket search and seizure warrant for this entire facility. Cole read smoothly, savoring every syllable as he watched the local cop's face fall. "That includes your locker, your patrol car, your personal vehicle currently parked in the north lot, and your digital footprint. Furthermore, at this exact moment, a separate FBI HRT raid team is kicking in the front door of your house in Fairfax. They are currently pulling up your floorboards and seizing your personal computers. We are going to find every single civil rights complaint you and your captain have ever made disappear. Keller visibly deflated. The fight drained out of him all at once, his knees buckling slightly under the massive weight of his own hubris. The terrifying realization that his entire life was being turned inside out, dissected under an unforgiving federal microscope, all because he couldn't resist racially profiling a tired man in a tan jacket, finally crushed the absolute last of his arrogance. He was nothing now, just a suspect in handcuffs. While the FBI thoroughly secured the prisoners and locked down the building's perimeter, Commander Lauren Whitaker walked purposefully toward Interrogation Room B. The heavy glass door swung open. She didn't immediately touch the black Pelican case sitting on the metal table. Instead, she unclipped a heavy encrypted military-grade satellite scanner from her tactical belt. With practiced, careful movements, she ran the device over the industrial-grade steel padlocks, the reinforced hinges, and the entire perimeter of the box. The device hummed quietly, searching for any microscopic evidence of tampering or forced entry. "Sensors indicate zero tampering, Chief," Whitaker reported, turning her head to look through the glass at Kendrick. Her voice held a deep, unshakable respect that stood in stark contrast to the disrespect the local cops had shown him. "The payload is green. The asset remains fully secure." Hearing the confirmation, Kendrick finally pushed himself away from the wall where he had been quietly observing the chaos. He walked slowly into the interrogation room, his heavy scuffed boots crunching rhythmically on the cheap linoleum floor. He didn't look like a victim. He looked exactly like what he was. An apex predator passing safely through a cage of lesser animals. He reached out and picked up the heavy Pelican case by its thick, textured handle. The dense muscles in his forearm flexed effortlessly under the weight of the intelligence that had almost cost him his life in Eastern Europe just days prior. "Let's get this to Arlington, Commander," Kendrick said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble of pure exhaustion. "I'm days past a hot shower and a decent meal. I'd like to go home." As Kendrick walked out of the interrogation room, carrying the classified intelligence that would secure vital national security interests for the next decade, Captain Collier stepped nervously into his path. The older man looked physically sick. His face was entirely ashen, a sickly gray pallor clinging to his skin, and a thick sheen of nervous sweat beaded across his forehead. He looked at the Navy SEAL, finally seeing the lethal quiet capability radiating from the man he had callously threatened to throw in a holding cell. "Chief Hale," Collier stammered, his voice cracking pitifully as he held up a trembling, placating hand. I want to apologize on behalf of my department, on behalf of my men. If I'd known who you were, if we had any idea..." Kendrick didn't stop walking. He didn't raise his voice, and he didn't puff out his chest. He didn't even look angry. He just stopped briefly, looking down at Collier with a profound, chilling pity that cut deeper than any scream or physical blow ever could. "That's the entire problem, Captain," Kendrick said, his deep, resonant voice now carrying clearly through the suddenly dead, silent lobby of the precinct. "You shouldn't have to know who I am to treat me like a human being." Collier flinched, physically stepping back as if he had been slapped across the face. "Your men didn't attack a Navy SEAL tonight," Kendrick continued, his eyes locking onto Collier's terrified gaze, pinning the man to the floor with his intensity. "They attacked an American citizen they thought had no power to fight back. They hunted someone they thought was weak. You fostered that culture in this building. You protected them when they crossed the line. And now you're going to burn with them?" Kendrick didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked out through the shattered front doors of the precinct, the relentless red and blue strobe lights of the federal convoy washing over his tired face in the freezing November rain. He climbed into the back of an idling armored black Suburban with Commander Whitaker. The heavy door slammed shut with a solid metallic thud, leaving the absolute wreckage of 3 corrupt careers in his rear-view mirror as the SUV sped away into the Virginia night. Back inside the ruined station, Special Agent Cole slowly turned his piercing attention back to Captain Collier. The local commander was still staring at the empty doorway, shaking like a leaf. "Captain," Cole said, his voice utterly devoid of sympathy or warmth, "I highly suggest you call your union representative, and then I suggest you find a very, very good defense attorney. As of this exact moment, the Department of Justice is officially opening a pattern or practice investigation into your entire precinct's history." Collier's mouth opened, but no words came out. He was completely paralyzed by the sheer velocity of his own downfall. "Hand over your badge and your weapon, Captain," Cole finalized, extending his hand. "You are relieved of duty." Collier slumped heavily into a nearby rolling chair, burying his face in his trembling hands as he surrendered his firearm. The sound of heavy shuffling footsteps forced him to look up just in time to witness the ultimate disgrace. Keller and Nolan, stripped of their gear and bound tightly in federal handcuffs, were being perp-walked out of their own station. They were forced to march slowly past the staring, shocked faces of the desk sergeants and duty officers they had worked alongside for years. There was nowhere to hide and no one left to bully. The karma was immediate. It was overwhelmingly public, and it was absolutely merciless. The wheels of federal justice are notoriously deliberate. They do not spin with the chaotic, aggressive speed of a corrupt airport arrest. Rather, they grind forward with a slow, meticulous, and terrifying inevitability. When those heavy wheels finally catch, they grind the guilty to absolute dust. Months after that freezing November night at Dulles International Airport, the fallout reached its ultimate conclusion inside the heavily guarded walls of a federal courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia. The trial of Vance Keller had evolved from a localized scandal into an absolute media spectacle. While the exact nature of the intelligence Kendrick Hale had been transporting remained heavily redacted under the Classified Information Procedures Act, shielding the military secrets from the public eye, the sheer arrogance of the crime was laid bare for the world to see. The prosecution's star witness wasn't a person, but a piece of digital memory. The high-definition body camera footage recovered from the precinct's seized servers by Special Agent Cole and his FBI team. The video had been leaked to the press early in the proceedings and went incredibly viral within hours. Millions of people watched, their stomachs churning with outrage as Keller and Nolan harassed, assaulted, and illegally detained a calm, perfectly compliant black man in a tan jacket. The public watched Keller sneer. They heard the ugly, prejudiced assumptions in his voice. They saw him unnecessarily tighten the steel handcuffs around Kendrick's wrists, whispering threats of federal smuggling charges into the stoic man's ear. And then the ultimate satisfying twist: the collective realization that the tired, quiet man absorbing this cowardly abuse was a Tier 1 Navy SEAL. The internet tore Keller apart, dissecting his every microaggression and demanding absolute justice. Senior Chief Kendrick Hale, however, did not attend the trial. He was already thousands of miles away, deployed on yet another highly classified operation, moving like a ghost through the shadows of a hostile theater. He had done his part simply by enduring the encounter with unshakable discipline. The rest was left to the lawyers and the merciless light of the courtroom. Vance Keller stood before the federal judge, and he was completely unrecognizable from the swaggering bully who had stalked the terminal. He was dressed in the bright, unforgiving orange of a Virginia Department of Corrections jumpsuit. The heavy iron chains around his waist and wrists clinked loudly with every slight movement. He had aged years in the span of months. His hair was visibly thinning. His complexion was a sickly pale gray, and his posture was permanently slumped. The aggressive, untouchable cop was entirely gone, replaced by a broken man who finally understood that the badge he had hidden behind could no longer save him. There was no union representative to object, no Captain Collier to sweep the paperwork under the rug, and no blue wall of silence to protect him from the wrath of the United States government. The jury of his peers had deliberated for a short time. It was a remarkably short time for a federal trial, signaling exactly how overwhelming the evidence was. As the foreperson stood and read the verdicts, Keller squeezed his eyes shut. Guilty on all counts. He was convicted of deprivation of rights under color of law, a severe violation of Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. He was convicted of assault on a federal officer. He was convicted of witness tampering for his desperate failed attempts to convince Nolan to lie to the FBI during the initial raid. The presiding judge, the Honorable Rosalind Wyatt, was an incredibly stern woman with a pristine reputation and absolutely zero tolerance for police corruption. She looked down from the high mahogany bench at Keller, her expression one of utter, unvarnished disgust. The courtroom fell so silent that one could hear the hum of the air conditioning vents. "Mr. Keller," Judge Wyatt began, her voice echoing sharply across the packed gallery, cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "You were entrusted with a position of public authority. You were sworn to uphold the Constitution. Instead, you used a badge, not as a shield to protect the public, but as a weapon to terrorize those you deemed beneath you." Keller swallowed hard, staring at his chained hands, unable to meet her gaze. "You let your prejudice and your fragile ego dictate your actions," the judge continued, her tone relentless and absolute. "And in doing so, you assaulted an innocent citizen. You violated his fundamental civil rights, and you directly compromised the national security of the United States by interfering with a highly classified military operation. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wore and a danger to the very concept of justice." The crack of her gavel was deafening. Vance Keller was sentenced to 7 solid years in a maximum security federal penitentiary with no possibility of early parole. Federal marshals immediately grabbed him by the arms, dragging him out of the courtroom to begin his long, miserable years behind bars. The collateral damage of Keller's ego was equally devastating. Bryce Nolan, who had broken down entirely during the FBI interrogation and agreed to testify against his former partner, received a lighter sentence of months in a minimum security facility. But his felony conviction ensured he was ruined. He would never work in law enforcement, private security, or any position of public trust ever again. He was doomed to spend the rest of his life working grueling night shifts in a sterile logistics warehouse, forever haunted by the night he blindly followed a bully into ruin. As for Captain Raymond Collier, the Department of Justice pattern or practice investigation unearthed a horrifying years-long history of buried excessive force complaints, racial profiling statistics, and covered up misconduct under his command. Given the choice between federal indictment and immediate surrender, Collier was forced into a disgraced, highly publicized early retirement. His lucrative pension was heavily slashed by the city council, and his reputation was permanently destroyed. He spent his days sitting alone in a quiet, dark living room, staring at the television, knowing his entire legacy was nothing more than a cautionary tale taught to cadets in police academies on how not to lead a department. Thousands of miles away, somewhere over the freezing expanse of the Atlantic Ocean, the deafening roar of 4 jet engines vibrated through the metal hull of a C-17 Globemaster. Inside the dim, red-lit cargo bay, Senior Chief Kendrick Hale sat strapped into a webbing seat, surrounded by heavy equipment and sleeping operators. His rugged tactical tablet illuminated his face with a soft blue glow. He had just received a brief, yet highly encrypted secure message from Commander Whitaker at JSOC detailing the final sentencing in Alexandria. Kendrick read the words. 7 years? He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. There was no triumphant fist pump or sense of vindication. To a man who dealt in life and death on a global scale, the destruction of Vance Keller was simply a necessary correction, a minor bureaucratic obstacle that had finally been cleared from the board. With a calm, steady finger, Kendrick tapped the screen, deleting the message forever. He powered down the tablet, slipped it into his tactical vest, and leaned his head back against the vibrating bulkhead. He closed his eyes, his breathing slowing to a steady rhythmic pace. The mission was over. The garbage had been taken out. It was time to sleep. When people in power abuse their authority, they often believe they are untouchable. But karma has a funny way of delivering justice when it's least expected. Chief Kendrick Hale didn't have to raise his fists to defeat his attackers. He simply let their own arrogance, prejudice, and ignorance be the very tools that destroyed their lives. This story is a powerful reminder that true strength isn't about how loud you yell or how hard you can push someone down. It's about discipline, composure, and knowing that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law. If this story of instant glorious karma and military justice got your blood pumping, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who loves seeing corrupt bullies get exactly what they deserve. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another incredible true-to-life story. Let us know in the comments what was the most satisfying moment of Keller's downfall for you. See you in the next.